These are Nebraska corn farmers. They work in acres, not hours, harvesting the energy and climate solutions the world needs. We are proud to stand with you.
The success of tomorrow's soy industry depends on the actions we take today. The future is here, and the time to move is now.
Market Journal, Television for Agricultural Business Decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources, in partnership with the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Promotional support provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Well, hi everyone, I'm Bryce Duskett, and thank you very much for joining us today on Market Journal. We've got a lot of ground to cover before the holidays arrive. This week we're looking back at the recent Confronting Cropping Challenges workshops and brushing up on defoliation thresholds. Elliott Dennis from the university will be stopping by to share some of his thoughts on the latest trends he's observing in the livestock markets. And Eric Hunt, he's got your extended holiday forecast standing by. All of that is coming your way on Market Journal, but first let's get started here. During the 2024 growing season, corn producers in the northeast part of the state experienced a bit more pressure from Western Bean Cutworm than usual. Meanwhile, pressure seemed lighter for producers further west. However, throughout the growing season, extension researchers teamed up with participants from the 2024 TAP Sprinkler Corn Competition to evaluate the economic impact of various mitigation strategies for Western Bean Cutworm. During the summer months, competitors in the TAP Sprinkler Corn Competition were given the opportunity to choose insecticide treatments targeting Western Bean Cutworm based on data gathered by extension researchers in mid-July, showing plants were under the economic threshold for treatment.
So in west central and western Nebraska, where we typically have our highest populations, I would say it was sort of a medium to low year. It was a little patchy for Western Bean Cutworm pressure. But the thing that surprised us this year is we saw higher numbers further east, especially in the northeast part of the state. So they don't always experience economic levels of Western Bean Cutworm in the northeast part of the state, but quite a few areas did this year and all the way into western Iowa. So we've really appreciated that our entomology program in North Platte has been able to collaborate together with the TAPS team to do an insecticide management decision on that TAPS competition. So we do scout the fields for Western Bean Cutworm, and we provide scouting data to the competitors, and then they were able to choose between not applying or one of 3 different insecticides. And then we followed up by looking at the ears of the corn plants and measuring how much feeding damage had occurred in the sprayed and unsprayed parts of those plots. So we were really able to look at how effective were those different insecticide treatments and even go all the way through and calculate any type of economic benefit that participants got from spraying. Well, this year was an interesting year to do this test. We actually were not above economic threshold with our scouting. So we had 4% of the plants infested with egg masses or larvae, and we recommend between 5 to 8% as the threshold. So despite not being at threshold, about a quarter of the competitors still did decide to spray. And so we saw that there was not any economic benefit of spraying. It really kind of confirmed why we use economic thresholds and how important they are, is anyone who did decide to spray an insecticide lost money on that. There just was not enough pressure to justify that expenditure.
While seeing why economic thresholds are important for producers to consider, producers who reached economic thresholds during the growing season may have some new mitigation strategies to try out in 2025.
Yeah, so one of the things that we found in our research is that using some of the insecticides, if you are above that economic threshold, using some of the insecticides that are less toxic to natural enemies, such as lady beetles, can be very beneficial. So these would be things like chlorantraniliprole or indoxacarb products. They are less harmful to lady beetles and other natural enemies. And then those good guys come in and can eat the egg masses and eat the little caterpillars as they're hatching out and really help provide some benefit for you there and some extra control. Of course, scouting is always going to be important. I think with this year, seeing populations of Western Bean Cutworm across a greater part of the state emphasizes that importance of scouting again as well. Also, this time of year, folks are purchasing their seed for next year. So that's really important to think about which GMO traits you're purchasing in your hybrid. So right now there's just one protein, the VIP3A protein, that is effective against Western Bean Cutworm. So really talk with your seed dealer and look for that VIP protein and see if you can get that in your hybrid, and then you'll have really good GMO protection against Western Bean Cutworm.
If you'd like more information on Julie's research into Western Bean Cutworm, you can find the latest updates by checking out the publications at cropwatch.unl.edu. Moving on now, the University of Nebraska's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources recently hosted the latest installment of the Heuermann Lecture Series. This series focuses on providing security and sustainability in food, natural resources, and renewable energy. The latest topic, industry and sustainability. Market Journal's Mike Straub sat down with the keynote speaker, Steve Evans, to learn about some of the big takeaways from his presentation.
University of Cambridge Director of Research and Industrial Sustainability, Steve Evans, delivered a December 4th Heuermann Lecture at the Nebraska Innovation Campus. His lecture described practical actions, long-term goals, and emerging opportunities and challenges in industrial sustainability.
One of the things that we advocate is looking at the part that we play in a wider system and opening up our minds to what could we do to make the system more effective, and then making that something that is of self-interest. So as an example, I visited a feedlot yesterday, and that manure goes back to many of the farms that supply them with the cattle. So those are relationships where, hey, my waste can be useful for you. How do we solve problems that are bigger than just being optimal in my business, with the boundary being the business? Agriculture is, I think, naturally more cooperative than the rest of the industrial system, because our neighbors tend not to shift and change over periods of time. Yes, we're competitive with our neighbors, but not competitive in the way that Ford is competitive with GM, for example. So the potential to look for system-level solutions exists in agriculture. Agriculture requires a lot of energy and material flows to make its own products. And maybe, until recently, we've treated those as separate systems. If we were farmers in the 1970s, we just expected our energy to come from somewhere. We paid for it. And we expected our fertilizer to come from some companies, and we paid for it. Now we're beginning to understand that we could be part of bringing those systems together, because we're the point at which all the materials come together. They come together on the farm. That's the big opportunity in the future. Either those systems will design new integrated answers and you will be pulled into their systems and hence not in control of your own future, or the farmers will say, we are the place where everything comes together and we will integrate. We're seeing it with bioethanol, for example. And in the best examples, farmers have taken bioethanol as an answer for themselves, rather than waiting for an ethanol company to land in their area and say, oh, please, can I sell my waste to you so that you can do something valuable with it? And I think in Nebraska, I can see bioethanol as a really good example of thinking bigger than the farm, but in a way that is definitely of self-interest.
The old saying goes, one man's trash is another man's treasure. The same can be said for the various waste products around the farm. As producers get more involved in the energy system, being proactive and working with other experts could be beneficial for the self-interest of your operation.
So farmers are getting involved in the energy system. That is only the start. Becoming fully involved in the energy system, I think, is inevitable, but becoming more deeply involved with the way that various wastes are used. So I want to give you one example. We call it treasure hunting. Having a look in your waste and finding treasure. If you knew that this thing was treasure, you wouldn't throw it away. So actually, sometimes you need to show your waste to other people and experts. And we were working with one company who make an agricultural product. They refine it. And they had a big waste stream. Of course, that waste stream was sent back to the farmers, and it was called a soil improver. I'm not sure they even knew whether it was a soil improver, but that's what they called it. But then we brought some of those clever people who wear white coats in laboratories, and we asked them to look inside this waste. And they found molecules called raffinate and betaine. And these molecules are $25,000 a kilogram. You go, wait a minute, we're throwing away, I should have made it pounds, of course, we're throwing away $10,000 a pound molecules. Once you've seen that, you think you're a little bit insane. But you didn't know those molecules were in there until you had the conversation with the experts from another area.
Understanding the size and shape of a problem is the first step in solving it. Waste is everywhere. Figuring out how to take that waste and turning it into energy starts with an open mind. Willingness to collaborate could help the future industrial system be more effective. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Mike Straub.
If you'd like to catch up and see the latest lecture from Steve, you can watch his December 4th presentation, as well as any of those past ones, by visiting heuermannlectures.unl.edu. It is that time of the show where we turn our attention over to the markets, and this week we caught up with University of Nebraska Ag Economist Elliott Dennis. Here's our conversation from earlier this week. Elliott, as always, we appreciate you joining us here on the program. Let's start our conversation here as we sit in December. Slaughter rates for cattle continue to decrease as we head into the holidays. Is that typical for this time of the year?
Yeah, generally you'd see a little bit of decrease. What we're seeing is kind of a large decrease in the slaughter. It's going to vary week to week. The issue that we're seeing is that just as feeder cattle prices are going up, feedlots are holding fed cattle back a little bit longer. That's why we're seeing the slaughter weights come up quite a bit. For example, our 5-year average is normally about 908 on steers. We're averaging about 955. So even over our 5-year average, we're almost 50 pounds heavier, and we're about 15 pounds heavier where we were last year. So slaughter weights are definitely up as feedlots are just kind of holding cattle back a little bit longer, and that's on the fed cattle side. But on the cow side, we're down actually quite a bit as well. So we're down about almost 20,000 head on a weekly basis, and it really just kind of has dropped off. There is some signs about like, well, why is that happening? Are people starting to hold back? Are they starting to say, okay, yes, we believe kind of these feeder cattle markets? I'm probably more in that camp, that I believe that kind of this is the first sign that we're finally going to start expanding. But what that's really done is kind of impact the price, right? So we slow down slaughter, prices for slaughter cows are going to go up. Combine that with strong beef demand, and you got a perfect market where the market is really trying to incentivize people to sell. So we'll kind of see how the year kind of continues to finish out on the slaughter side.
Let's talk profitability for a second when it comes to the packers. As a livestock economist, I have to imagine you've been seeing the headlines about the different meat companies that have been shuttering some plants. In the segment, a lot of the poultry side and on the pork side. What's your take of the situation right now?
Yeah, I think something has to break. Generally, the rule of thumb has been throughput on capacity. So we generally think about total pounds of production going through the system. We were at a situation even with reduced slaughter capacity but increased slaughter weights, total pounds of production was actually up a little bit. But in 2025, I don't think that's going to be quite the case. I think there is kind of this combination of slaughter weight and head capacity that needs to go through the plants for a number of reasons. Think of like equipment and processing chain speeds. And so I think we will kind of see something break. I'm not sure when it will be, we kind of have two dynamics going on there. The first is just increased pressure from the current market. Think of dilapidated plants, things that are maybe not technically efficient. And then we have these new set of plants starting to come up that will really start hitting in 2025 through 2027. And so if you're a kind of a meat processor, you can start to see what is some of the trade-offs. And really, I think in my mind, it's going to be what is going to be, the net gain from the new processing capacity that we're going to bring on versus kind of what's going to potentially roll off due to various efficiency reasons.
And here in local interest in Nebraska, that new plant in North Platte scheduled to come online here in 2025. They continue to make some substantial progress. Let's talk about the numbers in the cattle industry, namely the cattle on feed report. I'm sure you keep a close eye on those numbers. What's the latest one tell us?
Yeah, so I think when we think about kind of where expectations are at, when we think of on feed and marketing, that's kind of, we're all kind of in that same kind of boat, kind of where we should be at. The big number that we're going to be looking at really is placements. As we've seen in the feeder cattle market, prices have kind of really gone through the roof over the last couple of weeks. And really the idea is, okay, how many of those animals are actually going to enter the feed yard versus the ones that are actually going to go into stocking operations, and people are going to kind of arbitrage the weight gain on the cattle. And so I think those ranges are anywhere from about 92% to about 99% on placements from year over year. So for us, it's going to be kind of an interesting, how many of those actually went into the feed yard versus not. And I think that will tell us a lot about future cattle flow and really point to the January USDA cattle inventory report when we start to think about how many of those animals are outside of the feed yard waiting to enter versus the ones that are on feed.
Do you think that January report will maybe turn things around over the past few years, start to see an increase in the size of the U.S. herd?
I think right now they're still kind of sorting that out. I don't think we're going to see that big of a jump in this year, the 2025 January. 2026 is when we'll see that big jump. And of course, there's obviously changes if we're not aware of what's going to happen in the January inventory report. There's going to be changes in the number of states reported and all that kind of implication. So look for that report at the end of January.
Let's jump topics. How about word on highly pathogenic avian influenza? Not only in the poultry sector, continues to see that spreading here in Nebraska and other states right now, but also continues to be impacting the dairy sector. Your thoughts?
Yeah, really, I think our concern is it going to make the jump from kind of dairy cattle to beef cattle, and what that might ultimately mean for consumable meat products. They've done a lot of testing on kind of dairy milk and kind of trying to think about, is there transferability of avian influenza to humans? I think for us on the beef side, it says, okay, will that transfer to beef cattle? It's definitely going to have an impact as it continues to grow. We know avian influenza has had an impact upon the poultry market. Just look at eggs, starting to impact it. I think we will see some impact on the milk side. And so for us, what I'm watching for is, where is it going to be on the beef cattle side? Is it going to come over? How big? And what the consumer reaction will be to that? I think that's the big story to watch in 2025.
A big thanks to Elliott for joining us here on the program this week. Be sure to tune in next week as Market Journal presents a special half-hour discussion on the grain markets. We'll be discussing what's happening now and get into what you can expect in the new year. You won't want to miss that episode next week. Embryo transfer isn't a new concept in the beef industry, but it's playing a big role in helping producers make quick genetic progress to meet industry standards and consumer demand. To learn more about embryo transfer and whether it's worth the investment, check out the December issue of the Nebraska Farmer. It's now time to check in on weather with Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Eric Hunt. Well, Eric, with the holidays fast approaching, I understand you've put together a bit of an extended forecast for us to take a look at. How are things looking as we gear up for Christmas and the new year?
Thanks, Bryce. That is indeed the case. Let's start by taking a look at what's going to be happening right around the period just after Christmas. We are probably going to be entering into a little bit more of an active weather pattern for the western United States as we head into the last part of December. That may even bring some better chances of precipitation to the High Plains region, which would be great news for that area out here in western Nebraska. And I have seen some model runs that do produce some precipitation in the central and eastern portion of the state as well, but nothing terribly consistent just yet. What I am fairly confident in, though, is that we'll be very, very warm for this time of year as we head to the last part of December. CPC pretty much guaranteeing that this period will be above average. Now, we may not be looking at record highs at any given day, but we are probably looking at a pretty consistent spread of temperatures in the 40s and 50s for this time period. So definitely looking at a brown or green Christmas, depending on where you live in the state this year. Basically no chance of white Christmas. If you want that, probably go quite a ways north or head to the mountains. In terms of seasonal outlook for drought, the CPC does expect to see some more drought improvement or maybe outright elimination across portions of southeast Nebraska, expecting persistence of drought across most of the rest of the state. I mean, realistically, if you live in north central or western Nebraska where you're in severe or extreme drought, there's basically no chance that you're going to be out of drought by the time we head into this next spring. Best we can hope for is that maybe we do get some improvement. I am a little bit more confident seeing maybe just a little bit more improvement across portions of eastern Nebraska. But realistically, we're not looking at us getting into a particularly wet pattern anytime soon. So I would say where we are in terms of drought right now is probably where we're going to be in about a month. Some parts of western Nebraska may see a little bit of degradation here in the next month if we don't start seeing a little bit more precipitation. In terms of the INSO forecast, we have seen increased trade winds from the east here across the central and eastern equatorial Pacific. So we are very, very close to being officially in a La Nina. And CPC is expecting us to be in a La Nina as we head into the month of January, probably sticking around through early spring, and then a pretty good chance of us being back into neutral conditions as we head into this next summer, with even a slight chance of us being back into an El Nino as we head toward the later portion of the summer. All things being equal, La Nina is not always our friend in terms of drought, so the fact that we are in neutral is maybe a good sign. In terms of the next few months, CPC does show better chances of colder conditions across a lot of the north central United States. Lately, the cold has been mostly to our east, but this is showing that as we head deeper in the winter, we are more likely to see some of that colder air a little bit further toward the west. In terms of precipitation, not really any strong signal from the CPC for most Nebraska, wetter further toward our east and toward the northwest of us. And for temperatures, Dr. Judah Cohen at AER is also showing that his model predicts more cold across the north central United States as we head deeper into the winter as well. So their data point suggesting we are probably going to be a little bit colder as we head deeper into the winter. Particularly January, it looks like we may actually see a flip toward colder temperatures a little bit past the first of the year. Springtime, we are looking at potentially some wet conditions further toward our east. Unfortunately, this is not a good prognosis for drought across the High Plains region of western Nebraska and further down toward Kansas and Oklahoma and Texas. And we had a very warm, dry fall, which is kind of the reason we are seeing some conditions in drought for our area. And historical precedent would suggest that when we have a warm, dry fall, we do tend to be pretty dry across a lot of this part of the country the next summer. So 6 out of 10 years, when we've had a warm, dry fall, we have had a warm and dry summer, as indicated here by these composite maps. Not a guarantee, but something to watch out for. And our 2024 temperatures. Thanks, and have a great Christmas.
Finally today, it's time for a little crop talk. During the growing season, defoliation from leaf-eating insects is the most common type of soybean insect injury. But here's the good news. Soybean plants can often compensate for this defoliation. That's why it's crucial to understand the thresholds of economic impact when making pest management decisions. Market Journal's Bill Dodd is standing by with this story.
There are a complex of insects that defoliate soybeans here in Nebraska. Rarely does any single species reach population levels that will defoliate soybeans enough to cause economic damage. However, the combined injury of 2 or more defoliating insects can result in economic damage. On the other hand, many producers may end up overestimating the damage that has been done.
The big take-home message from the soybean defoliation exercise that we'll do today is that it's classically overestimated. And this is not just producers, crop scouts. Unless you've had a lot of training on recognizing how much leaf area really is missing, it's usually overestimated. In some of the preliminary runs that I've done with this fun 3D printed exercise, a lot of people are guessing 15 to 20% over what's actually missing. And that becomes a problem if you're overestimating. You might be spraying when you don't need to. Well, a lot of it depends on what you're spraying and how you're spraying. So someone that's running through something through a center pivot and chemigating will eliminate some of those application costs. They also get water applied at the same time. So that's one way to cut it down. But if you're bringing either an airplane or a ground rig through, you have the cost of that application for that unit plus the chemical cost. So anywhere, depending on what it is and how you're doing it, anywhere from $5 an acre easily up to $20-25 an acre.
So what is the proper threshold to start in on treatments for defoliating pests? That will all boil down to the leaf area index in your fields.
So what we're looking at in the vegetative stages is around 30%, but that really depends on how much canopy is there in the end. And then reproductive stages is around 20%. It really comes down, like I said, to that amount of canopy. So we call it leaf area index. So if you have a square foot of ground, you need at least 3.5 square feet of leaf area over that square foot of ground to effectively capture all the light from the sun that's falling on that square foot of ground. Some soybean varieties, when they're mature, will have easily 7 to 8 leaf area index. So if you're in that range, you can easily tolerate 50% defoliation and still be efficient at producing your crop.
Scouting your fields will be the first and best line of defense when dealing with defoliation. However, if you're unsure of the defoliation estimates, there are a number of tools available from Nebraska Extension that are designed to help you determine more accurate estimates.
The end game is just to understand that if you go it alone and just try and guess, you're going to overestimate. Use some of the tools that we have out there. We have a NEB guide on soybean defoliation. It has a set of 6 guide leaves in that publication that show you how much 50% really is, how much 5% is, how much 10% is. And so you can better train your eye and you have something to compare to really guess what is missing from the leaves you're looking at in the field. It comes down to scouting. Scout those fields. And understanding that some of those defoliators like the top level, some of them like the mid level, some of them like the bottom level. And just because you see a lot of damage up in the top level, when we had the mass migration of painted lady butterflies a number of years ago, they were all up on top. So things would look really ratty up on top, but you start looking down into the canopy and it's fine. You have a lot of leaf area left. So that's one of the things you really need to pay attention to is where are they actually defoliating at? Is it the whole canopy or just part of it?
In short, defoliation is notoriously difficult to estimate and is almost always overestimated. However, different portions of the canopy will suffer different levels of injury, so it's very important to estimate the entire canopy and not just the injured portion. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Now, if you'd like to learn more about this topic, you'll find an informative link along with this story. Head on over to do so at the Market Journal homepage. Well, that is it for this week's broadcast. Next week, as I mentioned, we'll have a special market presentation from this year's Nebraska Ag Expo featuring my colleague from the Rural Radio Network, Chad Moyer. We hope you'll join us then. But until then, I'm Bryce Duskett, wishing you a very Merry Christmas.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.